Welcome to Retro Stash. I'm your host, Ghost, and I will be covering some of the key differences between Halloween, the 1978 film written and directed by John Carpenter, co-written by Deborah Hill, and its novelization, written by Curtis Richards. The novel, released by Bantam Books in October of 1979, is a rare treasure of the horror world, with original copies selling for hundreds of dollars. That is why I did not hesitate to pay $275 plus tax for a copy at my local half-price books. In it, you will find some very interesting variations from the original source material. Some of these differences change the lore of the slasher classic. Let's look at 5 of the biggest differences. Number 1. Druid Backstory. The horror started on the eve of Samhain. The novel begins in early Celtic times with a druid king named Gwynwill preparing to offer the hand of his youngest daughter Deirdre for marriage. Enda, a 15-year-old boy who had been obsessed with Deirdre, wondered if she would accept him as her prince. He loved Deirdre with a secret passion that tortured him and at night caused him to cry out in his sleep. Enda had a shriveled arm and twitchy mouth from a botched delivery at birth. Still, he yearned for Deirdre and he would present himself to her. He needed to speak to her alone, and he seized his opportunity. He followed her furtively, darting from tree to tree until he found her stooped over the stream. She recoiled in disgust as he approached her and called him a monster before running away. Enda's body had been deformed at birth, but not until that moment had his soul been deformed. The night of Samhain, the town celebrated Deirdre's engagement to the handsome Cullen. They danced past Enda and, overpowered by rage, he plunged his blade through Cullen's jugular. Enda then planted his blade through Deirdre's chest. The tribe ripped him to shreds immediately after, only his head and heart were preserved. Enda's head and heart were taken to the Hill of Fiends, where cowards and other outcasts were left to rot unblessed. The king's shaman followed a request to curse the remains. Thy soul shall roam the earth till the end of time, reliving thy foul deed and thy foul punishment. Over time, Samhain slowly transformed into Halloween, and the evil of Enda's curse would continue to reappear. Number 2. Michael talks. Michael talks in this adaptation of the source material. What did the boogeyman do, Grandma? A 6-year-old Michael asks his grandmother the night he would murder his sister Judith. He doesn't have much dialogue in the novel, but he continued to speak, even after murdering Judith. During his trial, a young Michael is described as truthful, likely because he admitted to murdering his sister, and even charming by some news sources. Michael asks Loomis, "Are you sure you don't want us to have one?" in regard to a Halloween party at Smith's Grove that Loomis tries to stop from happening. Loomis allows the party to happen, and Michael nearly drowns a girl named Sophie after she beats him at musical chairs. It's implied that he speaks for several years before becoming completely silent. Number 3. The Smith's Grove chapter. Chapter 4 of the novel gives a deeper look at what it was like having Michael at Smith's Grove for all those years. Michael appears to have an aura about him that scares the other patients, and most of them learn right away not to mess with him. The ones who don't pay for their mistake. A nurse who quarreled with Michael fell down the stairs 2 days later, fracturing her pelvis. Michael also appears to have some respect for Loomis because he never hurts him throughout all those years. Loomis believes that it's because deep down inside, Michael knows that he's only trying to help him. At one point, Loomis tells Michael, "If you were to ask an orderly for keys, ask a guard or trustee to turn his back at the appropriate moment, you could stroll out of here." He believes that Michael chooses not to leave because he has it made at Smith's Grove and controls everybody. If Michael really had that type of control, then it better explains why he's able to drive the hospital car when he takes it from Nurse Marion.
Now, for God's sakes, he can't drive a car. He was doing very well last night. Maybe someone around here gave him lessons.
Number 4. The Shape's Mask. The mask seems to be more ghoulish in design. As described in Chapter 8 of the novel, while Lori looks out the classroom window, she noticed a station wagon parked on the street. Behind the wheel, gazing into her classroom, gazing it seemed directly at her, was a man. At least she thought it was a man. He was dressed as far as she could make out in dark khaki mechanic coveralls. His hair was black, but his face seemed preternaturally white, almost powdered. In fact, the more she looked at the face, with its red lips and sunken purple eyes, she wondered if he weren't wearing a mask. This is my rendition of what the 1978 film's mask might look like with some of these alternate features. Number 5. The kills. The kills are toned down a bit in the film compared to the novel. Michael's sister, Judith, is described to be a bloody mess, and Michael is said to have stabbed his sister 31 times or more in the novel. He stood over her, spent. It was almost impossible to recognize this piece of hacked flesh. Blood was everywhere, and the sour odor of it rose up from his hands, intoxicating him. Michael also goes to the kitchen for milk and cookies after killing Judith, which is pretty disturbing. The night that Michael breaks out of Smith's Grove, Loomis discovers the guard at the entrance gate. His head was twisted on his neck, as if some giant hand had tried to unscrew it. The truck driver that Loomis nearly discovers later on also has his head twisted around. Michael kills Annie by strangling her with his left arm and then slitting her abdomen. His immensely strong forearm was under her chin, crushing her windpipe. She beat and scratched at his arm, but it was futile. Her lungs tried desperately to suck air into her body. In one last effort to free herself, she pressed a horn on the rim of the steering wheel. It blared loudly into the night for a long moment. Then the knife plunged into her belly. Bob's death is essentially the same, but he seems to put up a bit more of a fight, hitting Michael a couple of times before being fatally stabbed. Linda's death is also similar, but she claws out Michael's hands, tearing away some of the flesh. Once she's discovered by Laurie during the final act, it's described that her neck and face were livid with broken blood vessels, as if some stupendous force had squeezed all her blood up into her head, had burst every capillary in her skin.
What's the boogeyman?
As a matter of fact, it was.
That's some brutal stuff. Thanks for tuning into my first video. What did you think about these differences between the film and the novelization? Do you see these details from the novel as canon to the lore? Please let me know your thoughts below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for future videos.